On December 24th, 2002, a pregnant 27-year-old Laci Peterson disappeared from her home in Modesto, California. 4 months later, her body and that of her unborn child were found washed ashore near the San Francisco Bay. A short time later, her husband, Scott Peterson, was charged and later convicted of a horrendous crime. However, there are some that claim Scott's conviction was a rush to judgment due to the purposeful omission of the vital evidence. Was the conviction of Scott Peterson justifiable, or is the evidence that points in an entirely different direction? This is the story of Scott Peterson. Before we get into today's story, my name is Jennifer. I'm a psychic, intuitive, and a tarot reader. And if you like the work that I do here, I would ask that you check out my Patreon page. Any support would be extremely appreciated with my heartfelt thanks. I'll leave a link below. If you're a fan of the dark and mysterious with a little tarot thrown in for good measure, then I am the girl for you. I upload 2 times a week on this channel, and if you're really a fan of tarot, you can join me on my other channel, Jennifer Walker Zen. So if that's of interest to you, I would ask you to like, subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you don't miss any of my uploads. Now let's get back into today's story. Scott was seen the day of Laci's disappearance by a neighbor around 9:30 a.m. loading umbrellas in the back of his trunk. From there, Scott claims to have left his house and headed to his warehouse, which is located 3 miles away. After getting to his warehouse, it is claimed that from 10:30 a.m. to 10:56 a.m., he was on his computer looking at some information regarding tools and checking his emails. Upon finishing up his minimal tasks, he then claims to have hooked up his boat and headed out to Berkeley Marina. Meanwhile, back at the Peterson home around 10:18 a.m., their neighbor, Karen, noticed the Petersons' dog, Mackenzie, walking around aimlessly outside the home with his collar and leash still on. Karen, being a good neighbor, after witnessing this, took Mackenzie and placed him in the backyard of the Peterson home. Allegedly during this time, Scott Peterson was en route to Berkeley Marina and parked his vehicle there around 12:55, which is confirmed by a timestamp ticket. He claims he was out on the water fishing for an hour, which wasn't particularly eventful, and then headed back to the marina and called Laci on his way home, leaving her a voicemail. He got back to his warehouse with his boat around 4:30 p.m. He claims to have gone straight home. After returning home, he noticed Laci's car in the driveway, but didn't think much of it. And in fact, according to him, the only thing he found strange was the dog being in the backyard with the leash and collar still on. In his mind, he assumed Laci was at her mother's house. He then took a shower and made himself something to eat and called her mother, Sharon, around 5:17 p.m., only to discover that Laci wasn't there. It wasn't until 5:47 p.m. that it was decided that the police should be called. That call was made by Laci's stepfather. 6 p.m., the Modesto police arrived and met with both Scott and Sharon Rocha in the East Loma Park area. It was suggested by one of the officers to go back to the house to see what they could find. The detective that came out the first night was Detective Al Burkini. He had the reputation of being somewhat of a bulldog when it came to detective work. He was known to be extremely meticulous and very observant. After arriving, Detective Burkini went into the house and immediately started going through rooms and drawers. Curiously, however, there was no evidence of forced entry or struggle. There was also no evidence of bloodshed of any sort. It looked as if 1 minute she had been making plans for that afternoon, and then suddenly she was just gone. Scott voluntarily sat down with police that evening for a 1-hour interview with Detective Burkini. It is reported Scott initially was very cooperative with the police. However, According to Scott, things were a bit dicey between him and authorities from the very start. He claims to have heard Detective Burhini remark to a fellow officer that he was acting suspicious and most likely hiding something. Early the next morning, Scott was asked to come to the police station once again. And once again, he was interviewed by Detective Brochini. This time, however, there was an additional detective present, John Bueller. Detective Bueller, like Detective Burhini, didn't exactly get a good feeling from Scott Peterson. According to Detective Bueller, Scott's lack of curiosity about the case struck him as rather odd. Coincidentally, that same morning, while at the police station, Scott Peterson called his father to seek his advice on what he should do now. Since he was being grilled by the police and being asked to take a polygraph test, initially Scott had agreed to take the polygraph test. However, after speaking with his father, who adamantly advised Scott against taking the test, he then changed his mind. This action on the part of Scott made authorities very suspicious, claiming that anyone who was really interested in finding their wife would want to be ruled out quickly in order for them to focus their attention elsewhere. Now, with that being said, I think it's important to explain exactly how a polygraph works and why it might not be the most reliable way to get to the truth. So the idea behind the polygraph is that examiner lies to the subject. These series of lies are necessary for the interrogation to have any chance of being successful to set the parameters of the test. As the examiner gets ready to tell these lies, they start by saying something true. They explain that the machine measures its design to record respiration, sweat, gland activity, and blood pressure. And what the examiner fails to mention, however, is that none of these reactions are uniquely tied to deception, meaning changes in these activities could mean anxiety or fear of something completely unrelated to deception. The examination is designed to make the subject afraid. Without the subject being afraid, the polygraph cannot perform any better than chance. So really, the test is entirely based on fear. In addition, a lot of times, if the examiner isn't getting the readings they are looking for, they'll trick the subject by claiming to have to make adjustments, therefore making the subject anxious, resulting in some sort of result. Once the community found out what happened to Laci, the response was overwhelming. People were showing up at their home, even people that didn't even know Laci, but had heard about it on the morning news, were volunteering on foot and horseback. They were searching the parks, the ponds, virtually any place they thought she could have fallen in. A volunteer center was established at the local hotel, the Red Lion Inn, located in Modesto. This was done to make sure the search could continue 24 hours a day with little or no downtime. Simultaneously, during this time, the Modesto police had received roughly 850 telephone tips. A large percentage of these tips were people claiming to have seen Laci Peterson Christmas Eve morning walking her golden retriever, Mackenzie. It is alleged by some that authorities really weren't doing their due diligence into following up on so many of these tips because Scott Peterson was their primary focus. 2 days later, on December 26, Scott's sister, Susan Caldillo, claims while at Scott's home that evening, she began starting dinner and a detective walked over to her and said he didn't think she needed to do that because they had obtained a search warrant and were most likely going to be there for a few hours and maybe even overnight. It appears that at this point, authorities clearly suspected Scott in Laceys disappearance. According to Scott's sister-in-law, Janie Peterson, Scott had voluntarily allowed the police into his home that evening of December 24th. 2 days later, on December 26th, they asked once again for Scott to consent to a second search in writing. This time, however, Scott refused because according to Janie, Scott was told to consult an attorney before putting his signature on anything. The assumption is that his refusal prompted authorities to obtain a search warrant, viewing Scott's refusal as suspicious. Coincidentally, according to Detective John Bueller, obtaining the search warrant was not so much to look for evidence, but to gauge Scott's behavior and demeanor around them. The thinking being that if he has nothing to hide, why not let us search the home to clear you? Once it became clear that Scott was the prime suspect, the media's response was overwhelming. There were multiple media network vehicles lined up and down the block with large domed lights blurring into people's homes constantly throughout the night, and even prompting some neighbors to temporarily relocate due to the continuous chaos. In addition, the continuous interviews of the family, in conjunction with the 24-hour news coverage, left many family members feeling shattered. What also must be noted here is Scott Peterson's demeanor at that time regarding his missing wife. And although it is true that not everyone grieves the same, his behavior at times could be off-putting, which the media noticed immediately. To many reporters, he never looked as though he was upset or even really grieving at all. However, supporters of Scott Peterson have claimed he was trying to project a sense of strength and felt that he portrayed too much emotion. He would have been labeled as being overdramatic or acting. One of the most severe critics of Scott's behavior was the TV host and legal analyst Nancy Grace. According to her, there was just something about Scott Peterson that rubbed her the wrong way, and she couldn't understand why Laci's family was begging for help, but her own husband seemingly was not. On her show, she appeared to have a very biased opinion on the case, and right or wrong, never missed an opportunity to put the blame squarely on Scott Peterson. It must also be noted that neither Scott's nor Laci's family had any such worries about public opinion, and at times displayed the types of emotion many have suggested Scott should have displayed, such as anguish and heartache. A potential break in the case took place on December 30th, when the Modesto Police Department released information regarding a robbery that occurred directly across the street from Scott and Laci's home. One of the residents that lived in the area, Diane Jackson, claims on Tuesday, December 24, she was on her way home when she noticed a strange van parked outside of one of her neighbor's homes, with several people outside standing on the lawn. She claims the reason she noticed them is because as she was slowing down, they all turned and looked at her, which she thought was odd. A day or so later, she found out that the house she had driven past had been robbed around the 24th, which coincidentally was the same day Laci went missing. After realizing what she had witnessed and the unlikelihood that two major incidents on the same block across the street from one another in that particular neighborhood was highly unlikely, she immediately reported it to police. Initially, everyone thought this was the breakthrough that they were waiting for. However, within a day of arresting Steve Todd and Glenn Pierce, the Modesto police announced that it was not connected to Laci's disappearance, and claimed that in fact the robbery occurred on the 26th and not the 24th, totally dismissing Diane Jackson's accounts of the events. The instantaneous dismissal of the connection between the robbery and Laci's disappearance bothered most people. However, behind the scenes, police were acting on a tip that they received from a woman claiming to be Scott's girlfriend. Her name was Amber Frye. Amber Frye claimed she met Scott Peterson on the advice of a friend that said he would be perfect for her. She claims she had a 18-month-old daughter and was looking to settle down with someone that was serious. Scott claimed to also be looking for a serious relationship, and from there it appeared to be instant chemistry. Things were seemingly moving in a positive direction when she noticed Scott acting odd. After confronting him, he allegedly told her he had lied and that he had been married but lost his wife and that it would be his first holiday season without her. He then promised to talk more to her about it after he returned from Europe. Amber, like any rational thinking person, accepted this explanation and looked forward to his return. According to Amber, a few days after Christmas, a friend of hers handed her a copy of a newspaper. In it, she noticed right away the person in the paper they were describing sounded a whole like Scott Peterson, from the truck he drove to the missing wife. She then claims to have been in a state of shock, and on December 30th, she reached out to authorities. Her interview with authorities lasted a little over an hour. During the interview, detectives asked her to help them by recording her and Scott's conversations, to which she agreed. During one of the calls, Scott can be heard describing how beautiful the fireworks were at the Eiffel Tower and how he had met friends from Spain and France. However, in reality, during that exact moment, he was at his missing wife's candlelight vigil. After witnessing these calls, two things became instantly clear to authorities. The first is that Scott Peterson was guilty. The second is that they were no longer looking for a missing person. They were most likely looking for a body. There was a total of 27 searches carried out in the San Francisco Bay to no avail. In addition, Scott was also being looked at as a potential suspect in the disappearance of a young woman named Christine Smart. The disappearance took place around the same time he attended college in that area. It was later found out, however, that there was no link at all and that the accusations were unfounded at best. And then suddenly, everything changed on January 24, 2003. Instead of police giving the press an update on the investigation, Amber Frye walked up to the podium and gave a prepared speech. Quote, "I met Scott Peterson November 20th, 2002. We did have a romantic relationship. I am very sorry for Laci's family and the pain that this is caused them, and I pray for her safe return." End quote. That speech was a total game changer. Virtually everyone that had supported Scott turned their backs on him. Family members felt betrayed, and volunteers from the community felt foolish and used. Additionally, the volunteer center was closed indefinitely, and the little bit of media that hadn't already condemned Scott instantly turned on him, making him one of the most hated men in America. It was at this point that Scott, seemingly with nothing to lose, agreed to 4 interviews. These news interviews, however, did nothing to rehabilitate his image to the public and actually may have made him look worse. In one interview, he alleges that his wife did in fact know about his affair with Amber Frye. However, he claims they were trying to work through it. In another interview, he referred to his wife in the past tense. Both mishaps destroyed his credibility. And then on April 14th, 2003, Laci's body was found by a person walking their dog on the coast of San Francisco Bay. A short time later, it was confirmed both Laci and Connor had been found. 4 days later, Scott Peterson was arrested. In his car, they found camping gear, his brother's ID, $15,000 cash, and 4 cell phones. Some have claimed he was making his way towards the border. However, he claims he was using these items to live out of his car, since he could no longer go home. There is no conclusive evidence either way. Scott's family hired Mark Garagos to be his attorney, mainly because he was on Larry King Live every night defending him. As it turns out, Mark Garagos was very effective in poking holes in the prosecution's case, such as the place she was killed and the time of death, making the prosecution's case look sloppy and not well researched. It appeared to most in the media and in the public that the prosecution was on the verge of losing. That is, however, until the recordings of Scott Peterson and Amber Frye's conversations were played. Scott appeared to sound happy, even at times flirtatious. What he did not sound like was a grieving husband concerned with the whereabouts of his missing wife or unborn child. The most damning audio is when Scott is heard complimenting Amber on how proud he was of her, doing her initial round out to the press at the police podium. The statement came off as delusional and out of touch. Additionally, on the tape, Scott comes off as being a compulsive liar, seemingly lying about everything, causing many to question if anything he said could be trusted. And on November 12, 2004, the jury convicted Scott Peterson of 2 counts of murder. First-degree murder with special circumstances for the killing of Laci, and a second-degree murder for the killing of his unborn child. Additionally, Scott Peterson's request for a new trial was denied, recently meaning he spent the rest of his life in prison. There are 3 points of contention. First, private investigator Gary E. Morney talked to witnesses that are able to very credibly identify Laci while walking her dog during the time period Scott was either at his warehouse or on the way to Berkeley Marina. He alleges to have spoken to Homer and Sue Maldonado, who were out delivering Christmas presents that day, and remembering seeing a very pregnant young lady struggling with her dog that almost fell over. Tony Freitas, a route driver for a local bread company, also recalled seeing a young pregnant woman struggling with a golden retriever. Another potential witness, Mr. Aguilar, remembered seeing a very pregnant woman struggling with her dog with no jacket on. He claims he remembers this because it was cold and she was extremely pregnant with no jacket, which made her really stand out. The distance between the first witness and the last was about a 45-minute difference, which is the time Laci was allegedly no longer alive. Second, the computer analyst for the prosecution found that 8 a.m. somebody was on the computer at the Petersons' home looking for umbrellas with sunflowers on them. It was well known to everyone that she loved sunflowers and in fact had several dresses as well as other items with sunflowers on them. This discovery from the prosecution appears to be inconsistent with their own version of what happened to Laci. According to them, she was killed the night before, which raises the question of who exactly was on the computer looking at sunflowers, if not Laci. And third, witnesses at the marina. Several people saw Scott's truck and boat during the morning of the 24th, and none of them recalled seeing anything in the truck or the boat that looked unusual. Several witnesses at the marina claimed it would have been impossible for Scott to have a large object in his boat the size of a body and not to be noticed by any of the residents living at the marina. This once again brings into question the timeline of the prosecution's theory of when he dumped the body. Now that you know the story, let's get some answers. Join me in my investigation room. Thank you so much for joining me in my investigation room. I first want to say that I felt like this case really got away from the fact that this was a victim involved with this, which was Laci Peterson. And I really want to bring it back to Laci Peterson and really find out what happened in this situation when it came to her. So that's really what the focus is going to be in this investigation room. And I need to say this legal statement, guys, every thing that I'm going to be talking about in these readings. For legal purposes, this is going to be for entertainment purposes only and alleged. Okay, I have to say that, guys. This is a legal statement. The neighbor had brought up about the fact that there was a robbery across the street around the same time that Laci had went missing. So I wanted to find out, was this a catalyst to her going missing, or something happening to her. So we're going to take a look at this now, but just to be clear cut, you can see that there's a lot of negative cards here, and so I would say no again. We see that there is some kind of signs, hopeful energy, some kind of overanalyzing, feeling trapped, about a commitment, a sense of heartache and sadness, knowledge of ending of tough cycle here, and trying to heal a situation in a sense of confusion. So I get the sense of no. Again, I say that question is no. Okay, so my next question is, and I want to say, again, for legal purposes, since this question is going to be so poignant here, this is going to be for entertainment purposes only and allegedly. Okay, question being, did Scott Peterson, was he responsible for the demise of Laci Peterson? And I would tell you that there's not strong enough cards here to say yes. So there is issues around it. So the next question is, was this murder, was this done by someone that Laci knew? So now we're going to get into some other details here, and I want to also preface this again, entertainment purpose only, allegedly. Okay, so this Laci did know of this person. We see someone that she was friendly with, and we see there's a masculine energy. We see that there was a timing around this and a sense of confusion, some sense of crossroads about it. There was hopeful for a friendship. There was some sly slickness or deceptions here, and a feminine energy and strong desires. So I get the sense that this person really wanted to know Laci a lot more. This person saw Laci as somebody as their friend, but obviously there was something that was deceptive about the friendship, or something that was manipulative or sly or slick about it in someone's desires. Okay, I want to bring up, as this is a summary of what happened with this situation with Laci, and tell you what I felt, what I picked up on, all right, around this case. I feel like something was took place around the park, or around this area where there was a body of water, and where Laci was familiar with. She would go often, okay? So around that area where she took her dog, and something happened to her around then. And I feel like she was taken away from that location, and I don't feel like, I feel like she was held for a while, but because of everything that went on with the media and stuff, I feel that was the reason why they found her later. I don't feel like she was killed right away, or her life ended right away. I feel like there was time that had passed, okay? So just to make that clear cut, and I do feel like it was possibly a younger kind of masculine energy, okay? That's another thing that I feel. And it may have been also somebody that walked their dog around the same trail, okay, around the same location. I feel like somehow she was isolated or alone somehow around that area, and that's how it created that situation for her to go missing in the first place, and then eventually for them to find her. So I love you guys, and I would love to hear your thoughts of what you feel happened with this situation. Again, I want to preface everything that I said is for legendary entertainment purposes only. And I have to say that for legal purposes. But I would definitely love to hear from you guys in the comments below and what your thoughts are on this case. If anything that you have to add about it, I definitely feel for the family and the situation, and so I send my blessings out to them, my prayers out to them. So I love you guys so much, and I would love to hear from you guys, and I will see you guys soon.